Donald J. Trump staged the greatest political comeback in American history. The reason I'm coming to you from what looks like a basement hideaway is that I am traveling with one of my colleagues. We're doing pro-life fundraising. We were up very late watching the election, watching Donald Trump's victory speech, which was pretty meandering. I think I probably put more work into speeches I give to a couple of dozen pro-lifers than he did to his presidential victory speech. But I first thought watching what was happening, and this is the greatest political comeback since Richard Nixon in 1972. But even on CNN, they were admitting that this political comeback is significantly greater than even that. Because after losses in the 2008 midterms, in the 2020 election, and in the 2022 red wave that turned out to be a red trickle, the Republican Party has now won the Senate. It's looking like their majority is even going to be bigger than it was thought last night. They've won the presidency and the popular vote. And Trump is up with all kinds of different American constituencies that previously voted Democrat. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons for this. Obviously, Kamala Harris was a historically terrible candidate. It turns out running on a platform of telling people that things are actually fine doesn't do very well for you. But of course, what I want to focus on in my commentary here is what does this mean for pro-lifers? Because there's going to be a lot of people picking through the data over the coming weeks, trying to figure out how Trump pulled this off. But what I want to talk about is what does this mean for social conservatives? And what does this mean for pro-lifers? So it means a number of things. First, it's really significant because abortion activists and Democratic strategists convinced Kamala Harris to make abortion the centerpiece of her entire campaign. We've covered aspects of this on the podcast throughout the campaign. She was the first vice president to visit an abortion clinic in person. There was a mobile abortion clinic operating outside of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago this summer, killing babies as Democrats took the stage to speak. She had a 50-stop reproductive rights tour. She had abortionists come on stage at her rallies in the final weeks. She talked about abortion constantly. She did it in interviews. She had her surrogates talk about abortion. Her husband, Doug, headed up a Men for Choice group. Abortion was the thing she was basically running on. Freedom was the slogan, but abortion is what she was talking about. And essentially, this was based on the calculation that a series of wins for the abortion movement post-Dobbs, in referendums in Ohio and Michigan and elsewhere, the abortion movement was on a winning streak after the crushing loss of Roe v. Wade in 2022. And abortion activists were essentially convinced that the path to the presidency was over the bodies of aborted babies. And as it turns out, that wasn't even close. Harris lost in a blowout, and that means the abortion movement lost in a blowout because she was their candidate. They have never had a candidate that was more all in on abortion than Kamala Harris. One CNN analyst put it really well last night. It seems like abortion was not the animating issue. And this is deeply satisfying in a number of ways, because when you see somebody running on the abortion ticket, more abortions for people, abortion in every state, she was willing to essentially rearrange American democracy in order to ensure that abortions could take place. So I want to make clear here, I don't want to just put on rose-colored glasses. We don't know yet what Donald Trump will do on the abortion issue, considering the fact that he staked out a pro-choice position throughout the campaign. And even yesterday morning, during the election, when he was asked by reporters how he had voted on Florida's Amendment 4 to enshrine abortion into the state constitution, he refused to answer. Trump is a wild card on the pro-life issue. And so what I want to do is review a few things that we do know. The first is that Harris had promised to remove the filibuster in order to ramrod through a national abortion law and essentially impose legal abortion on all 50 states. Neither of those things will happen now that she's lost, and it will be interesting to watch the Democrats suddenly change their mind on nuking the filibuster, because now suddenly they're going to realize that having a filibuster in place, which means that the Republicans need a certain vote threshold in order to pass their legislation, is the only thing that they've got to try and impede any aspect of the GOP agenda. So you're going to watch a lot of people who are willing to abort the filibuster just to get Roe reinstalled, now suddenly being huge fans of the filibuster. And again, the Democrats are all about norms and democracy until norms and democracy interfere with their abortion agenda, and then anything can go. The second thing we know is that Harris promised to prioritize the agenda of abortion activists if she was elected. And now abortion activists who poured all of their efforts into opposing Trump will have no influence. And the way Trump deals with people who disagree with him, which is one of his great flaws, is actually going to be helpful here, because abortion activists and abortion groups went after him hard. In the final weeks, they called him Hitler, they called him a fascist, they called him an authoritarian. And so it's going to be difficult for those same people to come back hat in hand and try to get some things out of Trump after running against him in the way that they did. We also know that Biden and Harris promised reforms of the American Supreme Court, which was essentially just aimed at breaking the conservative majority on the court at the moment. That will no longer happen. And again, if the Republicans suggested expanding the court, as Joe Biden did, and as Kamala Harris said that she supported, now they're going to be very opposed to it, because it means that a Republican president would get to appoint those extra justices. And so we're going to see that a lot of their discussion of norms was just very convenient. Something else we know that I think is slightly premature, but important to note here, is that social conservatives are already celebrating the defeat of the transgender movement. Again, I think that's slightly premature, but only slightly, because Trump and J.D. Vance ran hard against sex changes for minors, and they won. And it's interesting because we're already seeing mainstream media figures come out and say, well, actually, the fact that Trump and Vance campaigned against the transgender movement genuinely helped them. At CNN last night, Van Jones actually stated that one reason the Trump ticket succeeded is because they used the faces of trans children as a springboard. Now, that's obviously nonsense. They didn't use the faces of trans children as a springboard. They ran against sterilizing trans-identifying minors and treating gender dysphoria with double mastectomies and elective castrations. But there's an admission in what Van Jones is saying there. He's essentially admitting that campaigning against this worked, that it was in fact a springboard. It's an admission that the Democrats are losing or already have lost the public debate on this issue, and I think that's really important to note. And MSNBC this morning, Joe Scarborough said something similar. He said, quote, 85% of Americans oppose men transitioning after puberty and then competing against women. And I'm not just saying that the day after the election. And we're kind of seeing the media split. They're doing the same thing they did after Trump got elected in 2016, because they have to explain somehow that somebody they said was Hitler won again, and this time won the popular vote. They can't even blame the Electoral College this time. And so it will be interesting to see how many media outlets are actually willing to admit that America is just not as left-wing as they thought it would, as they thought it was, that they are not on board with the transgender movement, that running a campaign just based on abortion doesn't work, even though the previous abortion referendums indicated that Americans are more pro-choice than they are more pro-life, especially because of the blizzard of misinformation and lethal lies coming from every mainstream media outlet. But Matt Walsh noted this, quote, one of the takeaways from tonight's results, the trans movement is dead. Trump campaigned heavily against it and won in a landslide. Americans have finally rejected trans insanity. We had the trans activists on the ropes for a while. This was the knockout blow. Good riddance. Again, I think that that's premature. The transgender activists are deeply embedded in academia, deeply embedded in the media. And although last night discredited the media once again, I'm not sure that will make a much difference, but we can conclude that this is very good news, right? J.D. Vance was on Joe Rogan's podcast right before the election, and they're openly discussing all of the aspects of gender ideology, right down to autogynephilia and things like that. So I do think it's fair to say the transgender movement took a severe blow last night, and that the Democrats are losing the public argument on that, and that this is very clear. So what do pro-lifers do next? First, we do need to be very clear-eyed about what this means. It's good news in many ways, and I just listed 5 or 6 ways that this is very good news. But it's important to recognize that while Trump is not pro-life, he will be appointing thousands of people to positions throughout the government. Personnel is policy, and the pro-life movement must work hard to ensure that pro-lifers are appointed to places of influence. This is what made such an enormous difference during his first term. All the accounts we have of the first Trump administration is that Trump was surrounded by pro-life influences who were constantly pushing the pro-life agenda, and that this is one of the reasons he was willing to pass so many pro-life policies or endorse them or back them. But I think it's also important to recognize, as the Catholic philosopher Ed Feser, who's been doing some great work on this, as he put it on Twitter, and I want to retweet this, I want to emphasize that this is the case. Dear pro-life Trump voters who shielded their eyes from his endorsement of the abortion pill, the IVF mandate, etc., and insisted save your criticisms for after the election and get some rest tonight. You've got a lot of work to do catching up tomorrow. And those are my thoughts exactly, because the war for the soul of the GOP is now on. We have a significant victory, not only because Trump took the presidency, but again, also because of the Senate, and we'll see what the results in the House look like over the coming days. But now it's, what does this new Republican Party look like? Now, Trump's won his second term. He only gets one more term. What does the Republican Party look like going forward? Does this mean it's a permanently pro-choice party that has no plank affirming the right to life that was taken out by the Trump people this past summer? Or are we going to reinstall that plank? In short, will the Republican Party of the future look more like Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, or will it look more like the Trump family? I think all of this is up for grabs. And the pro-life movement needs to be working hard day in, day out to ensure that this government does not do active damage by passing, say, taxpayer funding for IVF, which results in countless unborn lives being lost. And that additionally, they put people in places to ensure that lives are actively saved by, for example, reinstating the Mexico City policy, something that Republican presidents have traditionally done on day one. There's a lot of things that the Trump presidency can do that will save preborn lives, that will affirm the importance of the pro-life movement in the GOP coalition. And so we'll be watching that very closely going forward. That brings me to what I actually consider to be the very best news of the night, which is the referendums. So abortion activists were preparing for a couple of things, not just a Kamala Harris win, which would basically give them their woman in the White House, but also a number of abortion referendums across the country. And keep in mind that pro-lifers were basically running 12-0. They had lost 12 referendums. And I've detailed on other podcasts the severe challenges that pro-lifers were up against. But the first big news of the night was on Florida's Amendment 4. This is really unbelievable news. So abortion activists needed to get 60% of the vote to install abortion up until birth into the state constitution. This would overturn Governor Ron DeSantis' heartbeat bill, which protects babies in the womb at 6 weeks. This is really important because Governor Ron DeSantis is the most pro-life governor in the United States. When the New York Times ran an expose of him, the worst thing they could find on him was that this guy wouldn't shut up about abortion even when he was, teaching history at school, which just made me like him even more. DeSantis has said he doesn't trust anybody who goes wobbly on the abortion issue because for him, it's an issue that is about preborn lives. It's about saving the lives of children in the womb. And so Florida was a purple state like 5 minutes ago. It was a state that could swing either way. And what Ron DeSantis did is he didn't go for a, say, 15-week ban or a 12-week ban. He went straight for a 6-week ban and then worked to defend that because he knew that would save the maximum number of babies. And so both abortion activists and pro-lifers recognize that Florida was an incredibly significant race. Because if Ron DeSantis could be defeated in Florida, in a state that is now, based on the election results last night as well, a deep red state, it meant that even a state that would break for Trump was still pro-choice. It would affirm Trump's decision to become pro-choice. It would also basically signal to the rest of the Republican governors abandon this issue entirely. And abortion activists spent $118 million to try and pass Amendment 4 in Florida, and they failed. It's the most fantastic news of the night. They failed by a couple of percentage points. Pro-lifers were outspent 8-1. Pro-lifers simply do not have the kind of cash that abortion activists do, that Planned Parenthood has at their disposal, that the Democrats have, and that, of course, all of the free propaganda from the mainstream press, which is publishing abortion lies nonstop, regardless of accuracy. Pro-lifers were only able to spend $12 million. Again, the abortion activists spent $118 million, and they lost. And Governor Ron DeSantis made all the difference. He is now the de facto political leader of the pro-life movement, bar none. And he and his beautiful wife, Casey, were tireless in their defense of the unborn. DeSantis did interviews. He pushed back against pro-abortion talking points. He used all of his power and influence to defend unborn babies. Everyone said this couldn't be done. Again, even Trump. He wouldn't say yesterday morning whether or not he had voted for Amendment 4. DeSantis has proven to every GOP governor and politician who has been running from this issue since Roe was overturned that one can actually run and win on conviction rather than in spite of it. We saw in Ohio, like Governor DeWine put forward one really anemic statement. And now we're seeing a lot of politicians damned by contrast. We're seeing this is what it looks like when a GOP governor is actually pro-life and actually defends babies. Because Governor Ron DeSantis stood in front of them. They're the most vulnerable members of our society, and he was willing to spend political capital to save unborn lives, which is not something we're seeing from a lot of other GOP politicians. DeSantis always reminds me of a great quote by Margaret Thatcher, the UK's Iron Lady. This is on an old episode of Firing Line with William F. Buckley, where he talked about establishing consensus. And she said this, quote, "For years now, the word has reared its head. Consensus. You must have consensus. It's a word you used not to use when I came into politics. We had convictions, and we tried to persuade people that our convictions were the right ones." That is what Ron DeSantis did. And according to estimates that have already been released today, the failure of Amendment 4 will save over 50,000 unborn lives every year. This is staggering. It means by 2028, by the time the next presidential election rolls around, hundreds of thousands of lives will have been saved because Ron DeSantis had convictions. He ran on those convictions, and people will be alive as the result of that. So there's more good news as well, because despite being outspent by, again, massive margins, pro-lifers also succeeded in some other referendums. So in short, one of the reasons it's important to know this is the losing streak of referendums since Dobbs was broken, not just by a Florida outlier, but by a number of votes in a number of states. So Nebraska was really important. Nebraska voted down Initiative 439, which was a proposed amendment to Nebraska's constitution that would create a right to abortion until fetal viability or when needed to protect the life or health of a pregnant woman. That basically means abortion up until birth. That Initiative 439 failed 51.3% to 48.7%. In South Dakota, Amendment G, which would have created a constitutional right to abortion, failed by even wider margins. So 59.5% to 40.5%. And then additionally, and I was very thrilled to see this as well, a proposed constitutional ban on, quote, medically assisted suicide, euthanasia, and mercy killing, end quote, in West Virginia was, as of this morning, with 90% of the votes counted, slated to pass. The Associated Press has already made the call. This means that a ban on assisted suicide, euthanasia, and mercy killing in West Virginia is now part of the state constitution. So again, I don't want to put on rose-colored glasses here. It's not all good news. Pro-lifers did lose some abortion referendums. This was expected. It's more unexpected that we won some of these significant referendums. So Missouri, Colorado, Maryland, Montana, and Arizona passed constitutional amendments enshrining abortion into the Constitution in various ways. In most of those states, abortion was already illegal. This is basically abortion activists trying to solidify the gains they've made since Dobbs. That's also true, for example, for New York State, where abortion is already illegal, through all 9 months. They also passed an Equal Protection of Law Amendment, which basically just further entrenches abortion and makes it incredibly difficult to get rid of it. So that doesn't really change the status quo on the ground, but it does really entrench the gains that they have made. But now the pro-lifers, we kind of know the lay of the land. Kamala Harris ran on abortion and she lost. She is not going to be able to change a lot of the norms of American democracy just to ensure that Planned Parenthood's agenda is passed across the country. The losing streak since Dobbs for pro-lifers has been broken, and we have a model of convictional pro-life leadership in Florida that every GOP governor that is genuinely pro-life needs to look to. It can be done. Ron DeSantis proved it could be done. So all those people who are saying, well, Donald Trump was so clever, he needed to pivot to this position on abortion in order to win, we know that's not in fact true. Florida's got a 6-week ban now. And Ron DeSantis single-handedly defeated that ban. $118 million versus $12 million spent by the pro-lifers. And he did it because he told the truth. He used his influence on behalf of those who had no voice, and he managed to get it through. Keep in mind here that Donald Trump has been holding a pro-choice position. He has been saying that a 6-week ban is harsh and extreme, and Florida voters actually rejected Trump's position and adopted DeSantis's position. So DeSantis, again, a model of convictional leadership that we need to look to. My view is that he's probably one of the most important Republican politicians since Ronald Reagan in terms of his character and his willingness to defend the things that are important. We dodged a lot of bullets, the pro-life movement did last night. The breaking of the post-obs losing streak was essential. Kamala Harris not operating the levers of power was essential. The fact that abortion activists poured all of their efforts into putting her in the White House and lost, that's essential. We'll see what happens now with Donald Trump, but holding him to account, trying to push him back towards the pro-life position, attempting to get him to redo some of the things that he did in his previous term, that's going to be very important. It's also going to be very tough, because it's also true that Donald Trump ran on a pro-choice platform, and he scored a massive victory having run on a pro-choice platform. The first Republican president to win the popular vote in a long time is also the first one who removed the pro-life plank from the GOP platform. So I do not want people to think Trump got elected and now we don't need to do anything because he's a great guy. We have a pro-choice Republican president. We have a pro-choice Republican first lady. And the task of the pro-life movement is not to back Trump. It's to ensure that the babies actually have a voice, because they are currently voiceless. And Trump has committed not to defending them except in the rarest of circumstances in the late stages. So that's the task moving forward. But we have a better idea of the lay of the land now. Some really good news. The results from yesterday means that tens of thousands of babies who would have died through abortion now will not. And that's just an extraordinary thing to consider. Once again, sorry for coming to you. We're on the road doing pro-life fundraising. I'm giving a speech tonight, actually, and we'll be talking about some of the things that happened last night. So sorry for coming from this background rather than my own studio, but that's the reason why. If you found this commentary helpful, again, please share it with people. This pro-life social conservative analysis of what happened yesterday. You can find our podcast on any platform. And please do leave any comments that you have underneath this video so we can engage in any discussion. And I'd love to hear from your perspectives. So again, thanks so much for taking the time to listen.